Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Female Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Danny, and in today's episode of the podcast, I'm actually going to talk about my own journey with all things health and fitness and my transition from bodybuilding and pushing the extremes to where I am now. And the reason I wanted to cover this is because I'm aware that a lot of you who listen to the podcast now or follow me on social media may not be aware of my own personal journey, might not have heard me talk about it, and I guess there's always updates as well. So I thought I'd kind of cover that again, and I really hope that those of you listening find this episode of the podcast insightful, and maybe it will be helpful for you on your own journey, or for those of you who are coaches working with clients as well. And if any of you do think of any questions as I'm going through what I talk about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love hearing from all of you on Instagram. So my DMs are always open. Please don't hesitate to drop me a message. I guess my where I should start is I guess getting into the fitness industry in the first place would be a good place to start from a personal perspective, not when I got into the fitness industry as a coach, but when I kind of got into all things fitness myself. So I played sport from a really young age. I was kind of into every sport under the sun as a teenager, but my main sport was football. I started playing football probably when I was about, I don't know, maybe even 12, 13. Very obviously casually at first, and carried on playing football until I was around 18 and took it pretty semi-seriously. I um trialed for Sheffield United Academy, played with them for a while, kind of decided I didn't enjoy that so much. I more enjoyed playing for my local team, so I didn't end up going down the route of trying to get into professional football, but I was all right and took it semi-seriously and always loved sport my whole life. And then when I stopped playing football, that's when I really got into the gym. I started going to the gym whilst I was playing football, just kind of tagged along with my mum and took things very casually and just kind of trained for enjoyment. And I think I just did the typical thing of going on the cross trainer, going on the treadmill, doing a few machines like the leg press, abductor, adductor, that type of thing, nothing serious. And I also used to do at-home workouts. I was 100% guilty of being involved in being obsessed with the BBG by Kayla at Signs. If any of you can relate, yeah, I was there with you. So I did start off with home workouts, then started going to the gym with my mum, and then joined the gym myself when I was old enough. I think you have to be 16. Do you have to be 16? Anyway, I joined when I was old enough, I think it was 16, maybe a little bit older, who knows. And was obsessed with the gym, like absolutely loved getting stronger. Also loved like spin classes, other classes, just loved all things fitness and any kind of activity that I could get involved in. And meanwhile, I was at sixth form trying to decide what I wanted to do when I was older, and I had applied for sport and exercise science at university. When the time came, I then decided that I wanted to be a personal trainer. And so I actually withdrew my application, even though I did have offers for university, because I was like, I kind of know that I want to be a personal trainer. Maybe I'm just wasting these years and this money. So I'll just do my PT qualification instead. This was back in 2015. So I did my PT qualification and started working at a pure gym. And at the same time, obviously started taking my training much more seriously. And I started to develop muscle tissue as a result of that. And one of the PTs at the gym had said to me, have you ever thought about competing? And at the time, I was interested in following like people on Instagram and YouTube who were competing in bodybuilding, Nikki Blackter, that kind of thing. But I'd never considered competing myself. I was just kind of interested in following along with their journeys and that type of thing. But I kind of thought, why not? Like maybe it's the next challenge after moving away from football and all of the other sports that I used to be involved in as a kid. there was a kind of, there's always been a bit of a competitive side of me. So I guess it was an opportunity to channel that into something else. And so I did my first competition in 2016. And in the sort of, I don't know, 6 months prior to that, I started working with a strength and conditioning coach. And he was brilliant, extremely intelligent, and he worked with me in the run up to my first bodybuilding competition. And also beyond that as well, I actually stayed with that coach. He was really fantastic and taught me a lot beyond the realms of bodybuilding. And I think that was a really kind of great way for me to, although I was getting into an extreme sport, I learned a lot about things outside of that sport and it taught me how to coach properly, essentially. And despite me being involved in the sport of bodybuilding, and obviously that sport being quite extreme, I did take a flexible approach to nutrition where I was like tracking my macros and training was very well thought out. It wasn't just like a cookie cutter plan. I was working with a one-to-one coach who really knew his shit. And so it was a really positive experience. But yeah, I got into bodybuilding. It was very casual at first. I just kind of wanted to do my first competition and I had no real long-term goals when I initially started out. But then my second competitive season, which was 2017, I started to do really well. And that's when I realized I kind of had a bit of potential in the sport in bodybuilding, you could say. And I had the ability to do well if I wanted to. So that's when it started to get more extreme and when it started to, I guess, consume much more of my life. And although I enjoyed it, that is when my health started to take a bit more of a hit, given the extreme nature of the approach that I was taking, because I wanted to do really well in bodybuilding. And unfortunately, bodybuilding is not a sport where health is the priority. It is a sport where if you participate, your health will take a hit, and that's something that you have to kind of accept. And I competed for another few years. So I competed in 2016, 2017, 2018. 2019 was an off season, and then I competed again in 2020. And 2020 was my last competitive season, and that was actually when Corona was happening and the lockdowns and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a hectic prep as well. And due to things that was going on in my personal life at the time, it was a bit of a hectic prep for those reasons. But competed for a really long time and it very much became a large part of my identity. And I also lost my periods throughout competition preps. I also started to struggle with things like my thyroid health and my estrogen being low alongside me losing my periods. And those of you who listen to the podcast probably know by now that if you do have absent periods and you have low estrogen accompanying that, you are at a much greater risk of fertility issues, of struggling with your bone health, of struggling with things like osteoporosis following that as you age. You're at an increased risk of heart health issues and early menopause and so much more. And so the further into my competitive career that I got, the more apparent these health consequences were becoming, the more aware I was of that, and the more at risk I would be of long-term health issues if I continued. And I also sort of got to the point, I guess, at the end of my prep in 2020, where I was starting to question, what am I doing this for? And I was starting to question, okay, like, I enjoyed my first few seasons in bodybuilding, but I was starting to get to the point where I was turning up at shows and wasn't getting that same excitement. And I was starting to resent certain elements of the process as well as it really taking up a lot of brain space, taking up a lot of my life, and me not really having much of a life outside of bodybuilding. And I was like, is this really what I want to live for? Like, I was just questioning, what am I getting out of this? Is this in line with where I want my life to go in the next 5 years? And the answer to that was no. So that at the end of 2020 was when I decided to move away from bodybuilding. I also just realized that I really value my health, and what I was doing was obviously not in line with that. It was going to come with further health consequences the longer I stayed in the sport. And so I was just kind of like, this isn't in line with your values. I do feel a bit out of alignment right now. Maybe it's time to make a change. Even though that change felt really scary and really daunting at the time, because, like I said, I'd tied a lot of my identity to the sport of bodybuilding. It was all I'd known for the last 5 years or so. And it was also my business at the time because I was coaching competitors and I had been for a few years. So it felt very, very scary to move away from the sport, but I just knew it was what I needed to do after coming to the realization that it just kind of wasn't making me happy anymore and that it was taking more from me than it was offering at that point at the end of 2020. And my health, like I said, was pretty much in the bin, alongside actually having amenorrhea, which is absent periods, and my thyroid function not being great. I had a rib injury as well, which I developed through my prep in 2020. So um, it was basically, I was in excruciating pain every time I twisted to the side, which obviously in bodybuilding and in training, a lot of the time, twisting is involved. So I was in a lot of pain all the time. I was living off painkillers. I was just trying to crack on. I taped my ribs up and it just wasn't really getting better throughout the whole of my prep. And so I obviously wanted to get my physical health into a good spot from that perspective as well, because I didn't want to be in pain 24/7. It's not nice being in pain 24/7. So that was a bit of, I guess, a reality check as well, and a bit of a turning point and a bit of a push maybe to move away from the sport, a sign that it maybe wasn't serving me anymore. And I also had used competing and bodybuilding as a coping mechanism slash a bit of a distraction from things that I had going on in my life that I needed to work through. So I knew that I'd have a fair few challenges to face coming out of the end of that last prep in 2020. My body image was also actually pretty poor at the end of my time in the sport of bodybuilding. And although I didn't have an eating disorder, my the way that I was behaving from a nutrition perspective would be classed as disordered because of the nature of contest prep. And my diet just wasn't something that was supportive of my health. So, like, for example, my digestion had really taken a hit towards the end of my time competing. Like, I just wasn't going to the toilet regularly, basically. TMI, but we're all friends here. Um, and that was because my health was in the bin basically, and because I'd been following, although I was following a quote unquote flexible diet and tracking my macros, and obviously the option for flexibility was there. When you compete in bodybuilding, you do end up in a lot of circumstances eating pretty much the same foods every day for ease, because it makes it easier to track, it makes it easier to diet, etc. And so because of that, my gut health was just really, really poor. And because of pushing my health to the extremes and constantly dieting, never really providing my body with the fuel that it needed. Um, and that's something that's not pleasant either. So I really wanted to get my health physically and psychologically from like a body image perspective, and also physically back into a really good spot. Um, and body image wise, for me personally, my body image took a hit throughout prep because of the fact that I was constantly monitoring my body. For me, I actually didn't get into the sport to look a certain way. Like, that wasn't my motivation. My motivation for competing was, like I mentioned before, it was kind of like another outlet for that competitive side of me. I definitely saw it as a sport. I didn't see it as I'm doing this to be as lean as possible or to look a certain way necessarily. You have to build your physique in line with the bodybuilding criteria, and so aesthetics is a huge part of it, but it wasn't like my focus getting into bodybuilding. It wasn't the reason why I was doing it. But my body image did take a hit throughout my time in competing because I had to monitor it so closely. I had to pay so much attention to it. I had to take progress pictures every day, sometimes towards the end of prep, multiple times a day. And because of that, I was constantly in line with the criteria, picking myself apart, being like, this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough, I'm not lean enough, or whatever, thoughts came up at the time. I was just always picking myself apart and never felt good enough because I was always thinking about the ways in which I could improve. And even when it came down to posing, I was like picking myself apart from that perspective as well. And these things can, this massive fixation on your external appearance can warp your perception of your body massively. Like I look back at pictures now that I took during the latter stages of my competition prep, where I vividly remember at the time thinking that I looked like I was carrying body fat through my midsection, and there is literally not an ounce of body fat through my midsection. I can look at that and objectively see that now, but at the time I genuinely didn't believe that. And that's how much your perception of yourself can become warped when you constantly monitor your body or you diet to an extreme. You constantly kind of pick yourself apart, and when your body image does take a hit. So that's kind of something that I wanted to change as well. And thankfully now I have a great relationship with my body. I no longer take any progress pictures. I no longer pick myself apart or anything. I do care about my physique to some extent. Like it's not like I don't care about the way that I look, because I do 100%, but it's not to that same extreme. And I am very accepting of fluctuations, but I also like if I was to, for example, gain body fat, it wouldn't consume my thoughts, it wouldn't impact my ability to go about my day, it wouldn't impact my sense of self-worth, whereas back then it absolutely would have. And I now see so much value in myself as a person outside of what I look like. And I also, my focus from like a training perspective, for example, is not just I'm doing this to change the way that I look or to burn calories or whatever it is, whereas it might have been in the past. Now it's like, no, I want to feel good. Like I'm training because it makes me feel good. I'm training because it feels good to be strong. It makes me feel much more clear-headed and energetic for the rest of the day and throughout my life. It makes me feel more capable. It supports my function. It supports my performance in my training and in like running, for example. So I have all of these other reasons why I train. It's not just all about the way that I look, whereas before it was all about the way that I look. So I still care about the way that I look, but it's not like no longer the center of my universe, whereas it definitely used to be. And that's the difference. And the difference is also that, like, if I saw fluctuations previously, it would massively interfere with my ability to go about my day, my ability to show up, my sense of self-worth. Whereas, like, if I see fluctuations now, it's like, okay, cool, there's the fluctuation there. Or, you know, I've gained some body fat through a period of my life for whatever reason. It is what it is. It's temporary, it'll pass. Um, but it also just doesn't define me. Like, even if I was to stay with a little bit more body fat, it is what it is. I have a preference, but it's not something that my life revolves around, and it's not something that causes me stress if I veer away from that preference, if that makes sense. And I think that's, for me, I'm in a really good spot, and I um feel at peace around that kind of thing. Whereas at the time, I felt so disconnected from myself and from my body because of all of the things that I've just spoken about. And when you lose your period, for me anyway, and I've had these conversations with a lot of clients as well, you can feel really disconnected with your body because you feel like it's not working the way that it should, and you feel like it's almost working against you. Um, and that can be a really strange experience as well. And because of all of these things, I knew that I'd have to go all in on prioritizing my health in order to address all of the health struggles that I was experiencing so that I could start to feel like myself again. And I accepted at the time that I would have to gain body fat. I placed my focus on improving my health, performing and functioning as my best, not just physically, but mentally as well. The process was so hard. It was so incredibly challenging. I felt uncomfortable in my skin at times, but I knew that it would be worth it when I got out of the other end of that messy middle where I was restoring my health and improving my body image and working things out. But I accepted that that process was going to be hard. I embraced it, and that's a really important point to make, I think, because whatever goals you have, there's going to be hard times, but especially when you're working on restoring health or improving your relationship with food or body image, there will be times where you want to revert back to how you were before. There will be times where you want to give up. But it's so important to accept the process is going to be hard to increase your likelihood of following through and getting out of the other end to that place where you really want to be and to give it meaning. And it helps during the process, whatever process you're going through, whatever goals you have, to acknowledge the positive aspects of it. So, for example, like I no longer had to spend so much time on my fitness pal. I was working towards getting my periods back, and so I knew that my obviously my health would improve, but I knew I'd feel more connected with my body as well. I had the ability and so much more time and brain space to engage in like downtime and connecting with the people in my life, forming new friendships, forming new relationships. Actually, since competing in bodybuilding, I have met all of my best friends, like all of my closest friends, other than one who has been my best friend since we were at school. That's obviously a different story, but like everybody else, all of the people that are closest to me in my life right now, I've met them since bodybuilding. And I truly put that down to the fact that I've had the capacity, the time, and the brain space to invest in nurturing relationships that I didn't have before. And the way that I was living my life before, just I didn't have any room for that and I didn't have the capacity for that. And so any friendships that I had at the time were from people that were from people, were with people that were also invested in the sport, most of them anyway. Whereas now my friendships are so much more like meaningful and go beyond surface level. I actually have one close friend, very close friend, who we were friends during my time bodybuilding, and we have stayed friends because our friendship goes beyond surface level. But other than that, a lot of the friendships that I had at the time were just kind of based on competing and not much beyond that. Whereas the friendships that I have now have so much more depth to them and have truly changed my life. And I'm so grateful for them. And so that was a massive positive for me coming out, that I acknowledged is, okay, I've now got time to nurture these relationships and to make real friendships that have genuinely been life-changing for me. And there were so many times throughout the process where I wanted to, I had the, well, I didn't want to, I had the gut instinct to revert back to dieting because the process was uncomfortable, but I knew that doing so would not solve my problems despite providing a temporary relief. And so that acknowledgement allowed me to continue to push forwards. I called myself out on and started to challenge any unhelpful behaviors that I had during this sort of journey. So I stopped taking progress pictures. I actively reduced my any body checking that I was engaging in. I stopped tracking my food, and with this, there was occasions where I overate because when you're recovering from amenorrhea, hunger is extremely high in a lot of circumstances. It was for me personally too. And this results in some overeating sometimes. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that may happen so that you don't feel like a failure if it does, and if you're working to restore menstrual cycle function. But I knew that eventually my hunger cues would regulate and that overeating would subside. And I would feel much more regulated around food and much more at peace around food if I pushed through. And that did happen. My hunger cues did regulate. I did start to feel less like a bottomless pit. And I did feel more in control and relaxed around food and able to manage my portion sizes. Whereas during that initial phase where I was working to restore menstrual cycle function, like I said, hunger was through the roof. And there were multiple occasions where I did overeat because of that. But I pushed through that phase knowing that it wouldn't last forever. And that is my advice for you if you're going through a similar journey. I also reduced my training frequency and intensity and started moving my body in different ways. So I tried different activities such as yoga, pole dancing. Once I'd got my period back, I actually dabbled in CrossFit and did like loads of functional fitness stuff. And that was amazing. And it just gave me like a newfound appreciation for my body. And again, was another really positive aspect of that process that helped me push through the difficult times and that also just enhance my life. Like it is so fun to explore lots of different forms of movement and lots of different forms of training. It is amazing and it can add so much to your life. It can give you such a greater appreciation for your body and what it can do, but it can also result in you forming new friendships and relationships as well, and is so worth it. And over time, my physical health improved and I started to feel more connected to my body again. So I started to appreciate it for what it could actually do and appreciate myself for who I was outside of my body and its function in comparison to before when I was bodybuilding, when my entire identity was tied to what my body looked like and how it could perform as well. Like that was a part of my body image being poor, is if, for example, I had a session which didn't go so well, I would feel a bit shitty about myself as a result of that. Whereas if that happens now, I'm just like, okay, it was just a bad session, like move on. And it doesn't impact the rest of my day or my mood. Um, and eventually my period came back alongside my sex drive, my personality. I am a much more diverse person now. I am more myself than I ever have been before, and my energy levels are back. My hunger hormones stabilized, and after I'd gone through an initial sort of exploration phase with food after being really rigid with it, I gradually stopped overeating because I didn't feel the desire to anymore. And I had more energy for work, and I started to love it even more than ever before. So it took time, but eventually things fell into place. My health was restored, and I felt like I'd sort of found myself again. I stopped comparing myself to the stage lean version of myself eventually. Stopping taking progress pictures was a really, in my opinion, integral part of that. I stopped weighing myself, and again, it was absolutely necessary for me to stop weighing myself because at the time, every time I stepped on the scales, my gut instinct would be, okay, I'm X amount above my stage weight. And during my time bodybuilding, there was always like a cap on the weight I should be. So like during your quote unquote off seasons or improvement seasons in bodybuilding, you generally the advice is you don't want to go too far above your stage weight because it's going to make the next prep really hard. So I had a cap of a certain scale weight, which I didn't want to go above in my time in bodybuilding because I knew that then it would make for a longer prep or a harder prep to get down to stage lean. And so I had a really negative association in my head with going above that scale weight, when in reality there was nothing wrong with me going above that scale weight away from the sport of bodybuilding. And it was healthy for me to be above that stage weight. So I had to get rid of the scales to stop myself from reverting back to old behaviors because I knew that if I had that trigger there and I hit that scale weight, I'd have a very strong urge to diet. And so I just removed that trigger. And now I'm fine with being weighed. Like it doesn't affect me at all. But I had to have that time away from it to improve my relationship with the scales and my relationship with my body to come back to it in a healthier way. I don't weigh myself regularly now, but if, for example, I go to the doctors and they weigh me, or um, I've been to like fitness testing and they've weighed me then, and it literally doesn't bother me at all, no matter what my my scale weight says. Um, it's just more an interesting metric in relation to the fitness testing or whatever I'm doing. But previously, it would have been, oh my God, I'm X amount above my stage weight, I shouldn't be here. Or I'm approaching this number, better be careful. And it's like, that's not helpful, especially when you're on a journey to improve your health. And so sometimes removing that data is a helpful part of that process, and it definitely was for me. And I never went back to tracking, and I felt truly at peace with food. I still don't track my food now. There has been the odd occasion where I've used it as a bit of a reference point, such as when I've been doing like a fitness competition or when I did my half marathon to make sure that I was eating enough. But outside of that, I generally don't track my food other than just, like I said, using it as a reference point every now and again. And if I ever felt like I needed to go back to tracking, say as like something to do with a performance goal or something like that, I would now, due to spending time away from the tool, have a much better relationship with it and a much better approach to it. And it would be just that. It would just be a tool. It would just be a reference point rather than something that I couldn't pull away from, or rather than something that I couldn't live without or was reliant upon. And so that time away from tracking has been like, oh my God, so freeing for me. It's freed up so much brain space. It's given me so much more peace around food. Like I said, I generally don't track my food at all now. And it's just been an incredible process. And my relationship with rest also improved. So I no longer felt guilty for taking downtime when I let go of all of these measurements and improved my health and learned to find joy in rest and acknowledge the benefits of it. It was uncomfortable. Like something that's really important to point out is that when when I say my relationship with rest improved, it wasn't overnight. Like when I moved away from bodybuilding and felt like I had so much more free time because I wasn't doing as many steps and I wasn't constantly tracking my food and I wasn't obsessed with doing ridiculous amounts of cardio or whatever. I had so much more time free, and rest at first did feel uncomfortable because I had a bad relationship with it. But I had to lean into that discomfort initially and force myself to take it to get to a point where my relationship with rest is now good. And so you often have to push through that discomfort to get to where you want to be. And again, that's a really, really important point. And I really rediscovered who I really was. I now accept myself as I am, and I actually have a lot of love for myself now, whereas I feel like in the past, just so much of my sense of self-worth was tied up in how well I did on stage or what my physique looked like. And looking back, that feels really sad to me. And I've never felt as happy and fulfilled as I do now. And obviously I still have difficult days. We all do. Like life is hard sometimes and things happen that just aren't enjoyable, and I get emotional just like everybody else. I'm actually much more in touch with my emotions now than when I was bodybuilding, which is, yes, I experience more sadness, but I also experience more joy, and that's a positive thing. But that's a whole side tangent. But anyway, that's life, and I'm more capable of dealing with the difficult days now and moving past them than I was during my time bodybuilding, where I just threw myself into the sport as a coping mechanism and ignored them and ended up quite numb as a result of that. I show myself and my body so much more respect than ever before. My thoughts no longer revolve around food, my body, or exercise, and my sense of self-worth doesn't fluctuate in line with those things like it would have done in the past. I now make time for the people in my life. I'm able to be present when spending time with them. I'm able to give more time, energy, and effort to them. And there are so many incredible aspects of life that I neglected for so long during my time bodybuilding. And for me, it simply wouldn't be worth it to neglect those things in pursuit of any goal ever again. I still set fitness goals. For those of you who, have followed me for a while, you'll know that I've done high rocks, I've done athletics, I've done half marathon, I've competed in local CrossFit competitions. I enjoy doing these things to celebrate what my body is capable of and push myself towards a goal from time to time. But my sense of self-worth does not depend on them anymore. And I am perfectly happy not having a fitness goal in the pipeline. It's just something I do for enjoyment rather than something that I'm dependent upon like I have been in the past. And that makes the process of working towards these goals and the days themselves so much more enjoyable. And it's also just a much healthier approach to take because if, for example, if I was getting physical health signs that things weren't in a good place, like my periods became irregular or whatever, it would be so much more easy to take a step back from whatever goal it was, or if I got injured, or if I had some life event that meant that I couldn't continue the preparation for a competition or a race or whatever, it would be okay. Like it wouldn't massively affect me. I'd just be like, cool, I can't train for that right now, and that's okay. And I wouldn't think any less of myself. I'd just crack on. Whereas before it would have been like, oh my God, my life is over. Or I'd make it work, or I'd throw myself into it and force the competition or the prep for the competition. When in reality, there are occasions in life where it's the best thing we could do is to actually take a pause from that thing and address whatever else is going on before we get back into it. So, yeah, I just have a much healthier approach to things now. And it means that if my preferences change, I can very easily allow myself to change my training style or pursue a different goal or actually just let go of a goal and live my life and be flexible with my program and my schedule and all of these things that have enhanced my life massively. So that's where I'm at now. My approach to all things health and fitness now is just that I live in a way to feel, perform, and function as the best version of me, both physically and mentally, so that I can thrive personally and professionally. Like, that is ultimately my main goal right now. And to be the healthiest version of me I possibly can in every way, not just in health, not just in physical health, but mentally as well. And that involves sometimes doing, I don't know, I did a 10K earlier this year. I'm training for a half marathon at the moment. Sometimes it involves those goals, sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay. And I love the times where I'm, chasing a half marathon goal and I want to beat a previous PB. I love that. But I also love the times where I'm resting and the times where I don't have like a massive goal. And that for me is exactly where I want to be. Like that is health. I want to be fit and healthy year round, year round. I want to be comfortable and confident in my own skin year round. I want to feel good about myself. I want to know that I can go out and run a 5 or a 10K whenever I want to, but I'm also really strong and I'm also healthy mentally and I feel good in my own skin. My body image is in a good place. I have a physique that I'm happy with. All of these things are what matter to me and that they are my goals right now. So I hope this has been an insightful podcast. Please let me know if you have any thoughts or if you want to send me any feedback or if you have any questions off the back of today's podcast. As I mentioned before, I love hearing from you guys and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.